Neil Armstrong. Before the moon, he is a test pilot, one of the best alive, flying the X-15 rocket plane to the edge of the atmosphere. In 1966, his Gemini 8 spacecraft starts spinning so fast that he and his crewmate are seconds from blacking out. He shuts down the entire control system and flies it back by hand. That is a large part of why he gets the first landing. On July 20th, 1969, the computer steers the lunar module toward a field of boulders and Armstrong takes over manually. He sets it down with roughly 20 seconds of fuel left in the tank. Then he climbs down the ladder and says the line that every human being alive now knows. And then he spends the rest of his life walking away from it. He leaves NASA in 1971 and goes to teach engineering at the University of Cincinnati, where students find the first man on the moon marking their homework. He stops signing autographs when he learns they are being resold. He threatens to sue his own barber, who sweeps up his hair after a trim and sells it to a collector for $3,000. He gives almost no interviews for 40 years. The most famous name on the planet belongs to a man who spends 4 decades trying to be left alone with it. He dies in 2012. Buzz Aldrin. He is the opposite of Armstrong in almost every way. He flies 66 combat missions in Korea and then earns a doctorate from MIT in orbital rendezvous, which is the mathematics of 2 spacecraft finding each other in the dark. The other astronauts call him Dr. Rendezvous, and not always kindly. He is the second man down the ladder, and he looks out at the landscape and calls it magnificent desolation. Before either of them steps outside, he takes a small communion in the lunar module, the first food and drink ever consumed on another world. Then he comes home to a life he has no map for. Aldrin writes openly about what happens next, in a way almost nobody did in that era. Depression, alcoholism, a marriage that falls apart. He puts all of it in his memoirs while his colleagues are still telling reporters they are fine. And in September 2002, at 72 years old, a man corners him outside a hotel with a camera and demands he swear an oath that he is a liar. Aldrin punches him in the jaw. Prosecutors decline to press charges. He is alive today at 96, the oldest surviving human being who has stood on another world. Pete Conrad. He is the shortest astronaut in the program at 5'6" and the funniest man in it by a distance. Before the moon, he flies Gemini 5 and Gemini 11, and inside NASA, he is famous for treating the entire space program as an excellent joke he happens to be inside of. In the summer of 1960, the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci tells him she does not believe astronauts choose their own words. She is convinced NASA writes the historic lines for them, so Conrad bets her $500 that he will say whatever he wants. On November 19, 1969, the third man to walk on the moon steps off the ladder and announces that the step may have been a small one for Neil, but it was a long one for him. It is a joke about being short, broadcast to the entire planet, and it wins him the bet. Fallaci never pays him a cent. Conrad goes on to command Skylab and saves that station after it is torn open during launch, then leaves NASA for business. He is still riding motorcycles in his 60s. In 1999, he crashes one on a road in California and dies of his injuries, 4 months before the 30th anniversary of his own landing. Alan Bean. He is a Navy test pilot who does something strange for that crowd. He quietly takes art classes at night while training to fly to the moon. He is the 4th man to walk on it on the same mission as Conrad, and he spends over 7 hours out on the surface. Then he comes home, keeps flying for another decade, and in 1981 he resigns from NASA to paint full-time. He never paints anything else. For 37 years, every single canvas is the moon. And he does something to those paintings that nobody else on Earth can do. He takes the mission patches off his own flown spacesuit and pulls them apart, thread by thread, because those threads still carry lunar dust from his time on the surface, and he works them into the paint. He presses his actual moon boots into the wet canvas for texture. He hammers it with the same tool he used to plant the flag. His paintings do not depict the moon. They physically contain it. He dies in 2018, the last surviving crew member of Apollo 12. Alan Shepard. He is the first American ever to go to space, in 1961, on a 15-minute hop that turns him into a national hero overnight, and then his own inner ear takes all of it away. He develops Meniere's disease, which floods him with dizziness and nausea, and NASA grounds him. He spends years behind a desk running the astronaut office, watching other men fly the missions he trained for. In 1968, a surgeon implants a tiny shunt in his ear in what is then an almost experimental operation. And it works. Shepard flies again. He walks on the moon on February 5th, 1971, at 47 years and 2 months old. That makes him the oldest person ever to do it, and nobody has taken that record either. At the end of the final moonwalk, he pulls out a club head he has smuggled aboard and screws it onto the handle of a sample collection tool. Then, one-handed in a pressurized suit, he hits 2 golf balls across the dust of Fra Mauro. Both are still lying where they landed. He makes a fortune in business afterwards and dies in 1998. Edgar Mitchell. He has a doctorate from MIT and he lands beside Shepard on that same flight. But during the mission, he runs an experiment NASA knows nothing about. On 4 scheduled rest periods, he concentrates on sets of random symbols and tries to transmit them mentally to 4 people back on Earth who have agreed to receive them. It is a private ESP test conducted in deep space, unapproved, and entirely off the record. On the way home, he looks back at the Earth through the window and something happens to him. He describes it afterwards as a shift in consciousness, a sudden, overwhelming sense that everything he is looking at is connected. That experience redirects the rest of his life. In 1973, he founds an institute to study consciousness scientifically, and he spends decades on questions most of his colleagues will not touch in public. He dies in 2016, one day before the 45th anniversary of his own landing. And one of these men leaves something personal in the dust up there, something still sitting on the surface tonight. He is the last name on this list, David Scott. He is already a veteran of that terrifying Gemini 8 spin, strapped in beside Armstrong when it happens. He commands Apollo 15, the first mission to carry a rover, and on the surface he does something on camera that no science teacher has topped since. He holds a geological hammer in one hand and a falcon feather in the other. On August 2nd, 1971, he drops them together in front of the watching world. With no air to slow anything down, they hit the dust at exactly the same instant. Galileo is proven right on another world. Before he leaves, Scott places a small aluminium figure in the dust called Fallen Astronaut. Beside it, he sets a plaque carrying 14 names, every man who had died getting humans into space from both sides of the Iron Curtain. The plaque is also missing 3 names. 2 Soviet deaths were still being hidden by their own government, and 1 American had died inside a program that was classified. Back on Earth, Scott's crew is caught carrying unauthorized postal covers to the moon and selling some of them. NASA reprimands all 3, and not one of them ever flies in space again. He is alive today at 94. James Irwin. He walks beside Scott on Apollo 15, and while he is working out on the surface, his heart starts skipping. Mission Control watches the rhythm go irregular on their screens, 250,000 miles away, with absolutely nothing they can do about it. Irwin has no idea it is happening. He simply keeps working, hammering core tubes into the ground, further from a hospital than any human has ever been. He comes home changed. Irwin says he felt a presence with him on the surface, and within 2 years, he has left NASA and become a preacher. He starts leading expeditions up Mount Ararat in Turkey to search for the remains of Noah's Ark, and he is badly injured in a fall on one of those climbs. In 1991, a heart attack kills him at 61. He is the first of the 12 to go, and the warning had been on his screen in Houston 20 years earlier. John Young. He is possibly the most quietly reckless great pilot NASA ever employed. On his very first flight, Gemini 3 in 1965, he slips a corned beef sandwich into his suit pocket before launch. In orbit, he pulls it out and offers his commander a bite. Crumbs float through the cabin, and Congress ends up holding hearings about it. Young flies anyway, 6 times in total, more than almost anyone. He walks on the moon in April 1972, and while he is inside the lunar module with Charlie Duke and open microphone, catches him complaining bitterly about the orange juice NASA has loaded them up with. He goes into considerable detail about what it is doing to his stomach, and the entire mission control loop hears every word. 9 years later, he straps into the first flight of the space shuttle, a brand new vehicle nobody has ever flown, and commands it. He stays at NASA for 42 years, longer than any astronaut in history. He dies in 2018. Charles Duke. He is on this list twice, in a sense. In July 1969, he is the voice in Houston talking Armstrong and Aldrin down onto the surface, which makes him the first person on Earth to speak to men standing on the moon. 3 years later, he goes himself. He is 36 years and 201 days old when he steps off the ladder, the youngest human being ever to do it, and nobody has taken that record since. Before he climbs back up, he takes out a small photograph wrapped in plastic and lays it on the dust. It is his family, his wife and his 2 young sons. All 4 of them posed for that picture on purpose, knowing exactly where it was going. On the back is a message saying, "This is the family of astronaut Duke from planet Earth, who landed on the moon in April 1972. The photograph is still lying there. 54 years of unfiltered radiation have almost certainly bleached their faces off it by now. He is alive today at 90. Gene Cernan. He nearly dies in space 6 years before he ever reaches the moon. On Gemini 9 in 1966, he goes outside for a spacewalk, and it turns into a fight for his life. He exhausts himself against a suit that will not bend, his body overheats, and his visor fogs over completely. He has to feel his way back to the hatch, essentially blind. He goes on to command Apollo 17, the final flight of the program, and he spends over 22 hours out on the surface across 3 moonwalks. Then, before he climbs the ladder for the last time, he kneels down in the dust and writes 3 letters with 1 finger. TDC. Tracy Dawn Cernan. His daughter, there is no wind on the moon and no rain. So unless a micrometeorite happens to land on them, those 3 letters are still sitting there exactly as he drew them on December 14th, 1972. He spends the rest of his life uncomfortable with his own title, arguing to anyone who will listen that the last man on the moon should never have stayed the last man. He dies in 2017. Harrison Schmitt. Every other man on this list is a pilot first. Schmitt is a geologist with a doctorate from Harvard, and he only gets to the moon because of a fight. The scientific community pushes hard for an actual scientist to go before the program ends, and NASA gives in. So Schmitt is moved onto the final crew. The pilot who had spent years training for that seat, a man named Joe Engel, is taken off it. Then the remaining missions are canceled anyway, which means Engel never gets another chance at the moon, and Schmitt earns the seat. Working near a crater called Shorty, he stops mid-sentence and reports orange soil which should not exist on a gray dead world. The samples turn out to be tiny beads of volcanic glass sprayed out of the moon in an eruption billions of years ago, and it becomes one of the most important discoveries of the entire program. He climbs the ladder second to last, which is why Cernan is the one who follows him. He is alive today at 91. The list closes on December 14th, 1972. 12 men across 3.5 years, and then nothing. It has now been more than 53 years since a human being stood on another world, which makes this the only thing in history our species has been able to do, and then simply stopped being able to do. Of the 12, 8 are gone. 4 are still alive, and the youngest of them is 90. Artemis intends to add a 13th name, and when that happens, this list opens again for the first time since 1972. But there is another window closing here that has nothing to do with rockets. Right now, 4 people on Earth can still tell you from memory what the dust smelled like when they took their helmets off inside the cabin. Every year, the chance that you hear this from someone who actually did it gets smaller. Soon it will be a story nobody alive can tell firsthand. If you made it to the end, comment 1972, so I know you heard all 12. And 12 men came back from the moon, but not everything we have sent up there ever came home,